Let's now get analysis from Godfrey Mulaudzi. He's a justice and violence prevention researcher at the Institute for Security Studies. Godfrey, good afternoon and thank you for your time.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
No, it's a pleasure to have you with us. You know, Godfrey, when listening, I was honestly disturbed, especially when the chair stated that being a hitman has become a lucrative business in South Africa. What did you or what do you make of this perennial issue of political killings in KZN?
Thanks. I think that is where it is at. Look, number of reasons, number of causes that we could look at as the driver for that. I mean, some of them are economic factors, which, as you have said, economic factors, meaning really what we talk about here is the socio-economic disparities in our country. That is just to speak about issues of unemployment, issues of poverty, and some of these hitmen, as evidence came out from the Moerana Commission, were just promised jobs to be a security officer in a municipality. Mm-hmm. So the economic factors are some of the drivers of these political killings.
Mm-hmm. And then beyond those who are hired as perpetrators, the killers, we now look at the politicians themselves. When listening to the chair, he spoke about the use of inflammatory language by political leaders, stressing that they themselves don't display a level of political tolerance at senior level, which inevitably sees those at lower structures imitating and sometimes even going beyond and killing others. What do you make of just that statement here, that the politicians at a senior level themselves do not display a level of political tolerance required of them?
And that's exactly where it is at, because, I want to also take you back to what the Moerana Commission was sought to investigate, which is the underlying cause of these killings. Now, the central to political killings is to create an environment of fear, right? Environment of fear that also underline or has got undertones of not having tolerance or political intolerance amongst each other. So one of the reasons that I also look at within my work here was also beyond the economic factors, there's also a historical factor, which is the continuation of the unresolved historical conflicts and their role in perpetuating violence. And I think a case study could be made within the province of KwaZulu-Natal. If you look at the case, the area of Pongola in the north, for example, the high level of political intolerance between the key main political parties in the area. And I think it is very much interesting to look, to observe going forward with the introductions of the Umkhonto Party. We've already seen or hear some of the pronouncement by the leaders of that party that has undertones of intolerance, has undertones of wars, tones. So I think that that's central. The political intolerance, it's one thing that is the key driver as well.
Mm-hmm. We've already started to report on some sort of spats between the African National Congress and MK in KZN already. So clearly something is already brewing. But to what some others have said, they've said that perhaps depoliticization of the administrative function within local government, where people are not hired because they're affiliated with any political party, would somehow help. But we see professionals who aren't linked to political parties being killed all the time just simply because they're in procurement in a municipality. So would this actually help?
This I think is one of among the many solutions that could help, the depoliticization and the professionalization of the public service and the security cluster as well. This point we must emphasize, because if we are to look at and I want to take you back a little bit to 2018, there's a report, the high-level review report by Mr. Mufamage on the state security agents. One of his findings was that the civilian intelligence is highly politicized and therefore compromised. And if we were to go a little bit further to the report in 2021 by Professor Sandy Africa that was looking at the July unrest, she also made a similar finding to a certain extent that the security cluster, in particular SABC, it is to a certain extent being compromised because of the high level of political involvement and manipulations in as far as they had to do their investigations of cases in that area. Now, The Moerana report has also broadened the the definition of political killings to include senior municipal managers, such as the municipal managers, but also to include the political parties' office bearers, such as your chairperson and so forth, because these are some of the people that are also targeted. But I think that, to answer your question in brief, why are some of the professionals being a target? Some of these people are just being forced to sign certain things which they believe that are illegal, and when they refuse, they get killed. So I think that there is an involvement of unscrupulous elements, a vicious circle between unscrupulous political parties and the criminal or the the dark world of criminals. In the case of KZN, we have seen everything.
Apologies for interjecting there, Godfrey, but we saw this in the very publicized situation or killing of Babita Deokaran, that here you do not need to be affiliated or linked to any political party. You can be just an ordinary servant, a civil servant, you're a professional, and somehow you're targeted. So would the depoliticization actually help in this regard? Because it's welcome, yes, because it leads to greater service delivery, but does it actually resolve the situation of vulnerability of these employees?
Look, I think what the emphasis, of course, is that it may, to a certain extent, help, because if you look at it, central to the cause of conflicts within municipalities is access to resources, some of them coming from the unscrupulous politicians with these unscrupulous criminals who wants to get access to governance, to public service resources, right? So that vicious cycle of the relationship between politicians and these criminals, resulting into the killing of officials. Evidence is there in the Moerane commissions where, for a certain example, the people underworlds from the taxi industry who get to, because they want resources within the municipalities, and the key to that will be politicians. Politicians will then promise them to get them, and then in return, the criminals would have to get rid of anybody else who will stand in the way of politicians to advance his career. And obviously officials will be there to to safeguard the integrities of the municipalities, and as such, they may become a threat. Your
views on the accessibility of guns as well as ammunition, because it's also part of the broader conversation here, that in most instances, we're seeing, even with police stations, there was once a press briefing where the police minister stated that over 350 guns were stolen from police stations in a space of 4 years. So meaning citizens would surrender the guns and they'd somehow find their ways into criminals' hands. What are your views on just that situation of how easily accessible guns are?
It's a big problem, because if you look at the number of murders are committed by these guns, but I must say that in our office, there is a relevant office that specifically do research in the prevalence of guns. And I specifically focus on political killings as well as, public violence in general. But there is people who specifically work. So I will just give you my opinion in regards to that. And I can say, for example, with the available information, we now know that the most of these killings are happening as a result of illegal firearms that are available in communities. So I think that one or two resolve is, I think that, there is a need to, we need to put more emphasis on the strengthening of the rule of law, prosecution and investigations. This, I think, that is where it's at, because once that we can get that right, even those who are aspired to probably get themselves involved in this kind of criminal acts might probably be discouraged to get involved in these things if we can get the prosecution, the investigation and the prosecution right. So I think that's where it's at.
Most certainly it would be a deterrent for would-be perpetrators. But just in closing, I want to take you back to the politicians here. Ever so often when there's a political killing, our journalists would doorstop a politician and ask around a political killing. But you'd have perhaps the likes of Gwede Mantashe stating that it remains a crime. They're very apprehensive or reluctant to characterize most of these killings as political killings, but say these are acts of criminality. Would it assist in any way if they characterize them as political killings?
It would help, because, look, if you look at the space where the trend of how these crimes take place, it is now overwhelmingly clear that these are a crime that are targeted to a specific section of society, which is political activists or politicians. Now, if it can be characterized accordingly, this will help us to be able to find routes and be able to, because we'll be able to know the trend of this kind of activities and be able to find solution easy. But overall, I think, yes, it is an act of crime that also needs to be dealt with accordingly. With the normal cluster security cluster approach that needs to be employed. There is, of course, the task team that were employed in the case that specifically with the political killings. I think they have made some inroads, and I think that so for us to characterize as such as political killings, it is to a certain extent helping us so far that we can see some results to that effect.